The MCU has adapted a number of popular and not so popular characters from all over the comics into the movies. I've made videos ranking the 20 worst adapted heroes and villains from the comic book source material into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as a video ranking the top 20 best adapted villains. And now it's time for the top 20 best adapted heroes to get their due. As always, we're trying to see, does adapting characters even matter? Or should they just be drastically changed to fit whatever stories these new writers want to tell? Let's take a look at the top 20 best adapted superheroes in the MCU and see what we find out. To make these lists, I've rated every single hero in the MCU by how well or poorly they've been adapted from the comics into the movies and shows and ranked them from worst to best. How did I achieve such a monumental feat, you ask? Well, it's simple when using my world-famous and award-winning system, the 3 C's. Those C's being, of course, costume, character, and continuity. Costume rates a character's outfit or costume, their overall look, and their superficial physical characteristics. Character rates their personality, their relationships with others, and their powers or abilities. And continuity rates their origin story, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. Now, as always, before we start, a character's placement on this ranking is not a commentary on their quality as a character, only how well or poorly they were adapted in relation to other heroes on this list. I know this disclaimer will be completely ignored in the comments, but I did my best. So, without further ado, let's start the count-up with the 20th most well-adapted superhero in the entire MCU, Kate Bishop. Both comic and MCU versions of Kate grew up in upper-class families. In the comics, her father is a criminal, while her mother died years ago. But in the MCU, their roles are reversed for some reason. I wonder why. Anyways, in the comics, she meets the Young Avengers when they try and fail to save her sister's wedding from gunmen holding it hostage. She shows herself to be quick-thinking and capable when she is able to save the Young Avengers and help defeat the gunmen. She then follows them back to the ruins of Avengers Mansion, and when the team is attacked by Kang, she grabs Hawkeye's bow and some other Avengers weapons to help out, and shows herself to be incredibly athletic and capable with the weapon. As Hawkeye was dead at the time, she takes up the Hawkeye mantle to honor him alongside the Young Avengers. Later on, Clint returns to life and takes Kate on as a partner in crime fighting and also serves as a mentor to her as well. In the MCU, we currently still have no Young Avengers, so all that's tossed out the window, and Hawkeye wasn't dead. Instead, Kate witnessed Hawkeye fighting in the Battle of New York when she was young and was inspired to learn archery and protect others. Many years later, she meets him, and somewhat reluctantly at first, he becomes her mentor and partner as well. Both versions are masters with the bow and both wear purple costumes. Besides her origin, one of the main differences is that the MCU version is older than when she first appeared in the comics, immediately making their window for a Young Avengers very, very small, which is likely why they changed the plan to doing champions instead, aka the almost middle-aged Avengers. Next up at 19, we have Hercules. Hercules in both the comics and MCU is the Hercules of myth, just as Thor is the Thor. He's the son of Zeus, he's wearing a costume that mixes a couple of his more iconic designs together, he's got his gold mace, and most importantly, he's buff and hairy. Though Hercules in the comics is usually sporting a much thicker, more manly beard. He's tasked by Zeus to track down and take out Thor to make people respect the power of the gods again. This is more of an antagonistic role than he usually has in comics, but Thor and Hercules have fought many times and have a very, very long-term rivalry with each other. That's pretty much all we know about him so far. But with some characters, the less we actually see of them, the more accurate they'll appear because the writers haven't had a chance to F them up yet. And we're just left to assume that they're going to act like how they've always acted. In the comics, Hercules is a hero and has served on the Avengers, but since he hasn't done anything but vow to fight Thor yet, it's very possible that he could serve in that role at some point in the future. It's also very possible we just never see him again, as the MCU has gotten a bad habit of setting up characters and just not following through. I'm still waiting for the return of Star Fox, Pip, Black Knight, Blade, Scorpion, Clea, Beast, and of course, Pizza Papa. So, we'll see. And speaking of, at 18 we've got Beast. Another character who first appeared in a post-credit scene and hasn't been seen again since. This version of Beast is from another universe. He's doing tests on Monica Rambeau after she appears in that universe at the end of the Marvels. Both comic and movie Beast are blue furry mutant scientists who work alongside Charles Xavier, since he did name drop him in that scene. The obvious main difference between comic and movie Beast is, of course, in the comics, Beast is from the same universe as everyone else, while so far in the MCU, the only Beast we've seen is from this other universe. Now you may be asking why alternate universe Beast makes it to the top 20 when Black Bolt, Professor X, and Reed Richards from Multiverse of Madness don't. Spoiler, they don't. Well, the answer's simple. They all died as soon as they showed up. Now, dying doesn't make a character a bad adaptation, but dying because you idiotically and slowly stretched your hand towards a powerful magic psychopath on a mass murdering spree when you're supposed to be the smartest man in the world sure as heck does. Moving on. Next up at number 17, with a non-2-second cameo character, Wiccan. Wiccan and his twin brother in the comics both have some very convoluted origins, but suitably for this list, so do their MCU counterparts. Here's the simplest explanation without getting into Mephisto, chaos magic, or time-traveling souls. Since Scarlet Witch and Vision could not conceive children, they were subconsciously created and birthed by Scarlet Witch through magical means, and then tragically uncreated later on. Years later, well, technically earlier, the lost souls of both children were reincarnated into two children birthed by two different sets of parents. Billy started displaying magical abilities similar to his previous mother's, and was recruited by Iron Lad into the Young Avengers. He eventually reunited with his also reincarnated twin brother, and they both learned of their true origins and connections to Scarlet Witch and Vision. In the MCU, Billy and his brother were also both subconsciously magically created and birthed, but instead of Scarlet Witch and Vision being in a relationship at the time, Vision was dead, and she had also created an artificial version of him as well. When she eventually learned the horrific toll her magical life was wreaking on the residents of a small town, she was forced to give up her fantasy life, and Vision and both of her children tragically ceased to exist. Instead of being reincarnated into a new life, Billy's soul wound up taking over the body of a dying boy, also named Billy, and he awoke with no memory of his previous life or this one. While researching his past and developing an interest in magic, Billy came across Agatha Harkness and some other witches, leading to him eventually discovering the secret of his origins and gaining access to the magical abilities he'd inherited from his mother. So, very different and very similar. Both versions were magically created, died, were then reborn with no memory of their previous lives, then teamed up with others to learn of their origins. Both versions wear similar costumes with a purplish outfit and red cloak, the main difference being that instead of a metal headband, MCU Wiccan wears an ugly-ass crown thing similar to what the MCU Scarlet Witch now wears, though it looks a lot better on her. Another major difference between the two is, how do I say this? Well, Billy in the comics and MCU is openly gay, but, well, let's just say in the comics, by just looking at him, you really wouldn't be able to tell if you didn't see him making out with his boyfriend. While in Agatha All Along, there are scenes where he looks like he's wearing more makeup than any of the middle-aged women he's sharing the screen with, so... Another major difference is, of course, him having no connection to the other heroes of the Young Avengers, and him not having a relationship with Hulkling. But that could all change going forward, and as long as they don't shove that crappy-ass Scar into the Hulkling role, I look forward to seeing how that all develops. Now, moving up to 16 with Spider-Man. Now hold up, before you start rage commenting, I know that a lot of people are already thinking Peter Parker is not a very good adaptation in the MCU. And you're absolutely right. His personality and motivations are totally different than they've ever really been portrayed. Instead of being a self-made hero, he was personally mentored by Tony Stark. Instead of being an outcast at school, he's pretty socially accepted. The list goes on and on and on. I've already made a previous video talking about the main reasons he's so different. So why does he rank this high? Well, simply because pretty much all of the superficial elements of Spider-Man are there. His costume's pretty similar. He was bit by a spider and gained strength, agility, and the ability to stick to walls, and a spider sense. He's a teenage genius who developed his own web fluid and swings around the city. He struggles to maintain his personal life while filling his vow to fight crime. He has an Aunt May and is picked on by a Flash Thompson. We don't know the status of Uncle Ben or if he even existed, but Peter does state he does what he does for reasons basically synonymous with great power and great responsibility, and then takes those words to heart when Aunt May says them before she dies due to his own irresponsibility. If you just ignore pretty much every element that makes Spider-Man Spider-Man instead of one of 100 other generic heroes with cool costumes and powers, then the MCU Spider-Man is pretty well adapted, baby. Now, with how the last movie left him, he does have a chance to show up acting a lot more similar to how he is in the comics. Incredibly secretive about his identity, distrusting of other heroes, hated by the public, and other things completely missing in this version of the character. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, next up to 15, we have, and it physically hurts me to say this, She-Hulk. Now, comic She-Hulk may be awesome, while MCU She-Hulk is not awesome, but that doesn't mean there aren't enough similarities when compared to other characters that I'm not forced to put her on this list. Remember, so far we've only had a couple cameos and characters who act virtually nothing like the source material, so 15 on the list ain't actually that impressive. In the comics, Jennifer Walters starts out as a bit shy and mousy, but through becoming She-Hulk, she eventually becomes a much more confident, assertive, sassy, upbeat, and heroic superhero/lawyer. In the MCU, Jennifer Walters starts out as a bit of a self-absorbed narcissist who redirects every conversation back to herself, including ones about her cousin's lost friends. But through becoming She-Hulk, she becomes a somehow even more arrogant and entitled lawyer who only takes her new job for the paycheck and thinks being a superhero is for losers. Okay. I'm sorry, that was harsh. Let me try that again. This is supposed to be how they're similar. In the comics, she gained her powers when she suffered a life-threatening injury, and her cousin Bruce Banner was forced to give her a life-saving blood transfusion or let her die. In the MCU, Jen don't need no man to save her and actually saved Bruce from a car crash where he was the one who was injured because he was wearing a device that stops him from transforming into the Hulk that we'd never heard of before or since, and then a cartoonish amount of blood poured into her open arm wound and made her into a Hulk. Alright, sorry. Every time I try to compliment any ways the MCU adapted this character well, I just start talking like that. So let's just stick to superficial comparisons and work our way up from there. Both comic and MCU versions are big and green, gaining muscle when they transform while maintaining their feminine figures. Both versions can transform at will and maintain most of their mind while doing so, though in the comics at first she was more similar to a traditional Hulk. Both versions are lawyers and practice law in their She-Hulk forms, and both versions are Bruce Banner's cousin. Their costumes are kind of similar, though the MCU version is much less, let's say, made with the audience who would really love She-Hulk in mind. And yes, in the comics, she has been known to break the fourth wall, but not in the way they portrayed in the show. Just in a cheeky, playful, this isn't really happening kind of way, it's just a comic. Not in some weird, all-powerful, through your Disney Plus screen to resolve the plot kind of way. I never thought of it as actually canon, and it's not something she really does when she's with the Avengers or when things are serious. So there we go. Let's move on. But first let me just say this. She-Hulk in the comics fights alongside the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and most heroes in the Marvel Universe as a respected and competent hero. The MCU version repeatedly objectifies the ass of one of her cousin's closest, basically dead friends right to his face, and may very well have bleeped that one guy. Anywho, moving on to 14, we have the Hulk. So like the previous entries, a lot of the superficial elements of Hulk are the same, while elements of the personality and continuity are completely different. In the comics, Robert Bruce Banner is developing a gamma bomb for the army, while in the movies, he's working on a way to cure radiation poisoning. Both versions are exposed to gamma radiation that transforms them into a Hulk. Though in the comics, the Hulk is initially gray and more intelligent, while in the movies, he's the more well-known green rage monster version we all know and love right from the start. Both versions are eventually pursued by General Ross as a fugitive and are in love with his daughter, Betty. Both versions of Bruce attempt to cure their conditions and transform into the Hulk during times of intense anger, stress, fear, or other strong emotions. Though the movie version has some weird element about him not being able to, Comic and movie Hulk are both incalculably strong and durable. Both versions are filled with rage and speak and act very simply. In the comics, though, there were many different versions of the Hulk persona who look, think, and act totally differently. While in the MCU, Hulk is pretty much just Hulk, or he's Bruce Banner in Hulk's body. One of the main differences is that though Hulk is initially a part of the Avengers when they first formed, he immediately left the team. While in the movies, he's one of the primary members. Both versions have a cousin who becomes She-Hulk and a son named Scar, though in the comics, Scar is awesome, while in the movies, Alright, up to 13 with The Vision. While Ultron in the comics was created by Hank Pym, in the MCU it was changed to Tony Stark. Vision, though, was created by Ultron in both versions. However, the circumstances were completely different. In the comics, Vision was created by Ultron as a subordinate to use against the Avengers. He was built using a modified version of the synthetic body of the original Golden Age Human Torch and the brainwaves of Wonder Man. Vision quickly betrays Ultron and sides against him with the Avengers, becoming a longtime member of the team. In the MCU, the Vision was created by Ultron out of a synthetic organic tissue and vibranium to serve as his next body. When the Avengers retrieved that body, Tony and Bruce decided to upload Jarvis into it to serve as a powerful ally against Ultron. Both versions look fairly similar, though in the comics he's a red-bodied being wearing an outfit, while in the MCU his outfit comes from rearranging his synthetic cells to give the appearance of clothing. The jewel on his forehead in the comics is a solar gem that can absorb and redirect solar energy, while in the movies it's the Mind Stone that can shoot beams of energy for reasons? Both versions can manipulate their body's density, becoming stronger or more resilient, also allowing him to fly and become completely intangible. Though the circumstances are different, both versions join the Avengers and begin a relationship with the Scarlet Witch, and both versions are eventually destroyed and return as an emotionless white form. Moving up to 12 with War Machine. James Rhodes in both versions is a close friend and ally of Tony Stark. Both versions work closely with Stark. In the comics, directly for him as his personal pilot. In the movies, as a liaison between Stark Industries and the United States. Both versions eventually gain armor of their own and become known as War Machine. But the circumstances are very different. In the comics, he first starts wearing armor to serve as Iron Man while Tony is battling crippling alcoholism. In the movies, he first dons the armor when Tony is lashing out as a reckless idiot and Rhodes feels forced to kick his ass and subdue him. Either way, Rhodes is one of the only people Tony trusts to wear the Iron Man armor technology, and both versions start wearing their own versions and going by their own identity, War Machine. The comic and movie War Machine armors both have similar black and gray coloring and have iconic shoulder-mounted weapons. The movie version has a variety of other weapons as well, but nothing compared to how over-the-top his comic weapons have been portrayed in some comics. Now up to 11 with Cosmo the Space Dog. Cosmo in the comics and movies was a dog from Earth sent into space during tests by the Soviet Union in the 60s. Both versions survived the trip and drifted through space before eventually winding up in nowhere. Both versions also developed increased intelligence as well as psionic abilities. The comic version's abilities are a bit more powerful, with advanced telekinetic and telepathic abilities, while the movie version so far has just been shown to have basic telekinesis and uses a translator to communicate with others. The main differences are what they've been up to since reaching space, with the movie version being captured and put into the collector's collection, as well as elements of their powers. The biggest difference between the both of them, however, I'd say, is that in the comics, Cosmo is a male dog, while in the MCU, Cosmo is a female dog. But unlike most gender swaps, this change was actually made for a reason. Likely to have the character better match his real-life inspirations Laika, the female dog the Soviets launched into space back in the day. The more you know. Now entering the top 10 most accurately adapted MCU heroes, starting with Iron Man. The origins of movie and comic Tony Stark are about as one-to-one as you can get in an adaptation. Both were brilliant but self-absorbed industrialist weapons manufacturers who inherited Stark Industries from their father after their parents died in a car accident that was later revealed to be murder. Both versions were showcasing new technology overseas when they were attacked and injured in an explosion, causing pieces of shrapnel to be lodged dangerously close to their heart. Both versions were captured by his attackers and forced to build weapons alongside another captured man named Yinsen. They then instead built technology to keep the shrapnel from reaching their hearts and a full armored suit to help escape. Both versions of Yinsen died in the escape and inspired Tony to dedicate his life and brilliance to helping others instead of just selling weapons and being selfish. The main difference is the war they were captured during and who captured them, each being a war contemporary to the time they were written. The comic version operated with the clunkier large armor for a while the movie version transitioned to the iconic yellow and red armor as soon as he'd returned home, but did start with a version of armor that looked very similar to how he started in the comics. Both versions are also very close friends with James Rhodes and Happy Hogan, and both versions were founding members of the Avengers and is often instrumental in saving the world from various threats. One of the major differences are that, though Tony drank more in the MCU before he became Iron Man, the comic version has a very severe problem with alcohol that took him a great deal of effort to overcome. He did not build Ultron in the comics, and does not act as a mentor to Peter Parker. He also maintains a secret identity a lot longer than he did in the movies, but the movie did make reference to it by having S.H.I.E.L.D. give him the cover story that Iron Man was his bodyguard. Another more awkward difference is his relationship with Pepper. In the comics, Pepper does work with him at Stark Industries, and though they do have feelings for each other, Pepper winds up falling in love with and marrying Happy Hogan in the comics. So I have to say to Jon Favreau, I'm impressed. You had the excuse to make out with Gwyneth Paltrow, and you didn't take it. At number 9, we move up to Black Panther. Black Panther is the title of the king and defender of the vibranium-rich and technologically advanced nation of Wakanda in both comics and movies. In both, T'Challa takes up the throne after the murder of his father. In the comics, his father was killed by Klaue during a vibranium heist when he was much younger. In the movies, he was killed by Zemo in the modern day in a plot to frame Bucky and cause the Avengers to fracture. Both versions are empowered by a vibranium-mutated herb that grants enhanced strength, speed, durability, and senses. Both versions use technology within their suits to aid them, including a vibranium microwave to absorb the momentum of attacks and retractable claws. One of the main differences between the two is that in the comics, T'Challa is a genius and a scientist, inventing much of the technology he uses, and ranks among the most intelligent minds in the Marvel Universe. In the movies, they plucked this attribute out of him and gave it to his sister, Shuri. Both versions wear a full black bodysuit, though the comic version has worn many versions of the costume, some very similar to the movie. He is more often portrayed much more regally and majestic, with a large collar, cape, and golden trim. The movie did reference the gold, but only to make fun of it, which is always great. Moving up to 8, we reach Thor. Pretty much all of the iconic elements of Thor from the comics are in the movies. He's an Asgardian, the son of Odin, and brother of Loki. He wields Mjolnir and was cast down to Midgard to learn humility, and his hammer can only be lifted by he who is worthy of the power of Thor. While in the MCU, he was cast down in his own body. In the original comics, he was banished to Earth with no memories of his true self and giving the identity of Donald Blake, a crippled physician, so Thor would learn humility and the value of helping others. Though in the movie, he did have a name tag saying the name, so, that's something. Eventually, in the comics, Blake found a simple walking stick, and when he lifted it, it turned out to be an enchanted Mjolnir and was transformed back into the mighty Thor. Both versions met and fell in love with immortal Jane Foster. In the comics, a humble nurse. In the movies, an inspiring astrophysicist. The movie version wears a costume similar to what Thor was wearing at the time in comics, and he was also very quickly shown to have worn a classic-style outfit for at least some point in the past, even if it was just kind of for a joke. A big difference is that the movie version doesn't usually talk in the same majestic Shakespearean way the comic version usually does, though he has been shown to in a few instances, specifically while speaking with Loki in Avengers. Hela is not his sister in comics. Her familial ties to Thor were taken from how Angela was worked into Marvel continuity when they got the rights to her from Neil Gaiman came in for a whole Todd McFarlane. It's all a convoluted thing. Doesn't matter right now. And though movie Thor is quite large and muscular, he's got nothing on the incredible build of comic Thor. Though, he is a literal god, and Chris Hemsworth, he's a man trying his best, so we'll forgive him. Next up at 7, we're at Black Widow. Both versions of Black Widow are former Soviet spies who were trained and brainwashed in the Red Room. Though in the movies, it was while she was very, very young, while in the comics, it was later on in life. Eventually, both saw the errors of their ways and switched sides, allying with both the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D., one of their main motivations now being to right all the wrongs she'd committed in her past by serving as a hero. Both versions are incredibly highly trained in all forms of combat and are able to manipulate others using deception and seduction. They both wear very similar black suits and use wrist-mounted devices that contain a variety of gadgets and weapons. Though a lot is similar in the look and their motivations, there are some pretty huge differences. One is that, though we haven't seen all of her past, it's very unlikely she wore any costume similar to the outfit she did when she first appeared as a villain. Another is that the past relationships to Red Guardian, Yelena Belova, and Iron Maiden are all completely different in the comics. In the comics, Yelena and Iron Maiden were not familial figures to Natasha, but were both rival spies who'd been sent to kill her since her betrayal, though Yelena did come to become a friend and ally to her. And Red Guardian did have a relationship with Natasha in the past, but it was not as a father figure, it was as her husband who she thought had died, so that's kinda awkward. Another major difference is her friendship with Hawkeye. In the movies, it is the definition of platonic, but in the comics, there was romance between the two. Many superficial elements and part of her personality and backstory are very similar, and if it wasn't for her solar movie, she'd probably rank a little bit higher as well. Now we get to number 6 with Dum Dum Dugan. Dum Dum Dugan in the comics and movies is a boisterous, stocky soldier who fought in World War II while wearing a bowler cap and sporting a large, distinct mustache. Both versions fought alongside the Howling Commandos, but in the comics, the Commandos were led by Nick Fury, while in the movies, they were just led by Captain America himself. In the movies, he is a major part of the fight against Hydra and helps Peggy Carter in the newly formed S.H.I.E.L.D. after the war. The only really drastic difference between the comic and movie version of the character is that the movie version, presumably grew old and died naturally, while the comic version lives on into the modern day and serves S.H.I.E.L.D. alongside Nick Fury, or he did until all that original sin BS. The other main difference is that as far as we know, the MCU version of Dum Dum Dugan never led a task force to take down Godzilla, but never say never. We could always get a MonsterVerse MCU crossover at some point, and if they took the opportunity to do the most comic accurate thing ever, I'd see that movie 100 times. Now entering the top 5 most accurately adapted heroes in the MCU, starting with The Warriors 3. The Warriors 3 are Fandral, Hogun, and Volstagg, a trio of friends, warriors, and adventurers who are allies to Thor. All 3 share elements of their distinct looks with their comic counterparts, including the colors of their outfits and their distinct facial hairs. Though Hogun was clean-shaven in the first movie for some reason, he gained a closer look in the sequel. They also use weapons similar to their source material with a sword, axe, and mace. Fandral is a charming, dashing swashbuckler. Volstagg is voluminous and somewhat bumbling, but jovial and loyal, and Hogun is grim and reserved. While the other two are Asgardian, Hogun in the movies is shown to be a Vanir. While in the comics, his origin isn't specifically stated, he is from an unknown land far away. Though they are more subdued than the comics, a clear effort was made to make their personalities and designs recognizable, while slightly more grounded as the entire MCU was at the time. With as big of a part as they played in the first Thor, it would have been interesting to see more, but they were pretty much glossed over in the second movie, and then just killed off in the third movie, to be replaced by your new favorite sidekick character, Korg! Everyone loves Korg, don't we? Oh boy, Korg is so cool and funny. Why isn't he on this list? He never gets old. Anyways, next up at 4, we reach Deadpool. Now, Deadpool was not originally a part of the MCU, but since Disney just bought out Fox, they've now added him and his universe into their multiverse. So unlike a character like Venom, who did appear in the MCU but is still a Sony character, Deadpool is now officially a part of the MCU. Different comics have given totally different stories to Wade Wilson's origins, but the simple version is that he had military training before eventually becoming a mercenary, and the movie version keeps that element of his backstory. Both versions met and fell in love with Vanessa Carlyle, though the comic and movie versions of her are very different. Wade's then tragically diagnosed with an extreme and inoperable form of terminal cancer and leaves Vanessa to spare her from watching him slowly die. In the comics, Wilson found hope in the Weapon X program and was experimented on to implant Wolverine's healing factor into another. In the movies, he is recruited into a mysterious experiment that subjects him to tortures to trigger any latent mutant genes within him. His awakened healing factor heals him faster than the cancer can kill him, but he becomes hideously disfigured in the process and starts wearing a full-body suit and mask to hide his deformity. Both versions continue on as mercenaries and skirt the line between hero, anti-hero, and anti-villain, depending on the current motivations. In the early comics, Deadpool was a more serious villain, but later on developed the semi-heroic and likely insane personality traits he's become known for. While in the movies, he was portrayed that way pretty much from the start, even before the experiments. Their costumes are some of the closest adaptations we've ever had, including being one of the few heroes to try and adapt the white eye look that so many characters in comics have and they rarely attempt in live action, even though it's frickin' cool. Both versions use a variety of weapons, including his iconic katanas. As of now, the movie version is yet to use the teleportation device he's worn in the comics, but that would be badass, let's hope. And though both versions break the fourth wall from time to time, it doesn't appear in the movie version that he talks in yellow as far as I can hear. One of the major differences that keep Deadpool out of the top 3 spots is the fact that, like Beast and other X-Men characters, he's from a different universe with its own continuity from the mainline MCU world. And as far as we know, his world is only populated by whatever Fox had the rights to at the time, and not other characters like the Avengers and Spider-Man. Next, we move into the top 3 most accurately adapted heroes in the MCU, starting with Doctor Strange. Dr. Stephen Strange started out as a brilliant but egotistical and arrogant surgeon. In the movies, he turns down surgeries he considers beneath him or that could screw up his perfect record. In the comics, his main priority is money, and he refuses to help patients who can't afford his bill. Both versions then get into a car crash that severely damages the nerves in their hands, causing him to be unable to continue his work as a surgeon. Desperate to fix his hands and restore his proud status as a surgeon, Strange exhausted all of his wealth hopelessly searching for a cure. After using up the last of his wealth, he traveled to the east in search of a mysterious Ancient One. Instead of finding the cure he was looking for, the Ancient One offered to teach him magic and mysticism. Though the details of him agreeing to learn are different, both versions quickly began to master the mystic arts at an incredible pace when they agreed to learn them, learning a number of complex spells and gaining mystical items such as the Cloak of Levitation and the Eye of Agamotto. Though in the comics, the eye has very different functions and is not a time stone. Though Christine Chapel is his love interest in the movies, they were not in the comics. Though Doctor Strange did have a relationship with another woman who used the Night Nurse identity in comics, Linda Carter. Though Mordo was a student of the Ancient One when Doctor Strange met him, in the comics he was not originally an ally to Strange and was already planning to try and betray and kill the Ancient One. And though Wong is a close ally of both versions of Strange, in the comics he is not another student of the Ancient One, but serves as Doctor Strange's loyal manservant. Both versions take up residence in the Sanctum Sanctorum and protect the world from various mystical threats. Like all characters, there are differences, but by MCU standards, he's pretty well adapted, and he was about to rank a spot higher until I realized one incredibly major and character-defining difference. In the MCU, Doctor Strange was not, and still is not, the frickin' Sorcerer Supreme. Frickin' Wong is. Even though Strange is much more adept at magic than Wong, and was the one the Ancient One planned to have as her replacement, he still just is not the Sorcerer Supreme. Doctor Strange was able to stop Dormammu from devouring our universe, refused to release the Time Stone to Thanos, even under threat of death to him and his allies, and only gave it up to enact an incredibly complex plan to defeat Thanos that spanned years and cost his own life. And he stopped Scarlet Witch from abusing the Darkhold to cause untold destruction to the multiverse. Meanwhile, Wong stood and watched hopelessly while Strange came up with a plan to stop Dormammu, betrayed his oath, and gives up the location of the Darkhold because he doesn't like watching his allies be tortured, uses his powers to break Abomination out of prison just to hang out with him at underground fighting matches, and then can't even bother to return him on time to his own trial, and apparently spends his free time sitting around watching The Sopranos with some drunken party chick. Who do you want to be responsible for protecting Earth from mystical threats? Come on! Now, down to the number 2 best adapted MCU hero with Captain America. Captain America started out as Steve Rogers, a frail young man rejected from joining the army and fighting overseas during World War II. When given the chance, he volunteered for Project Rebirth and was injected with the Super Soldier Serum and bombarded with Vita Rays by Professor Erskine that enhanced all of his abilities, turning him into a super soldier. Erskine was then killed by a saboteur, taking the secret of the Super Soldier Serum with him. In the comics, Steve Rogers then puts on a costume and joins the fight in World War II as Captain America. In the movies, he does as well, but first is used as a propaganda figure to sell war bonds around the country, wearing an outfit very close to his original comic outfit and iconically punching out Hitler over 100 times. He then travels overseas, and when he learns of soldiers who have been captured, he goes out to free them in a full costume and officially joins the war effort as Captain America. Both versions originally fought with a more triangularly shaped shield before gaining their iconic circular shield. Both versions work alongside Bucky and the Howling Commandos during the war and fight against the Red Skull and eventually Hydra. In the comics, Bucky is much younger and meets Steve after he becomes Captain America, while in the movies they'd known each other before and Bucky is around the same age as Steve. Both versions also served under General Phillips and had a romantic relationship with Peggy Carter, though in the comics, Peggy was an American. They then both sacrificed their lives to stop an advanced bomber plane towards the end of the war, but was then frozen in ice and left in suspended animation until being unthawed in the modern day. After being unthawed, he joins the Avengers, becoming the heart of the team and a respected leader to the other heroes, fighting various threats in the modern day as a superhero. Both versions meet and become friends and partners with Sam Wilson, the Falcon, as well as begin a romance with Sharon's niece, Peggy Carter. Both versions are men of tremendous righteousness and virtue, able to quickly discern right and wrong in any situation, representing the spirit and ideals of America, but not necessarily the government itself. Both versions also met and redeemed a brainwashed Bucky who'd been operating as the assassin, the Winter Soldier. And both versions had a falling out with his close friend and ally, Tony Stark, in a civil war that tore the Avengers apart. Both versions are one of the few individuals who are worthy to lift Thor's hammer, and though the circumstances were very, very different, both versions eventually become old men and pass their shields off to Sam Wilson for a time. The only real differences are the costume he wears, and is much more grounded than the very superhero-styled costume in the comics, though since he did wear a version of his classic costume for a while in the movies, that's less of a change than other characters, and that since things move so fast in the movies, we never really got to see him as a long-term superhero in the MCU with a whole roster of villains. Within the MCU, Cap is one of the best adaptations from the comics and ranks pretty high in most of the 3C categories, but there is still one character who beats him out by just a teeny bit, even though it's a bit of a cheat. Because now, finally, here's the #1 best adapted hero in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Daredevil. Like Deadpool, Daredevil's continuity was not originally part of the MCU. Well, that's not quite true. He originally was, but then they said he wasn't. Then they said he was, but his continuity would be different. But now it seems that they're finally giving in, and he will just be the same as the Daredevil we saw in the earlier Netflix show, like everyone watching just assumed it would be. So, whatever. Matt Murdock was the son of the boxer Jack Murdock. Matt was encouraged from an early age to study and apply himself so he wouldn't wind up as a washed-up nobody like Jack saw himself. When Matt was young, he saved a man from being hit by a truck. Radioactive waste from the truck hit Matt's eyes, blinding him, but also enhanced his other senses to superhuman levels. When Matt's father refused to take a dive in a fixed fight, he was murdered by the mob, and Matt was left orphaned and left with an intense hatred of all crime. Matt was trained by a mysterious blind martial arts master named Stick, who taught him how to use his other senses to their fullest potential and trained him to be an expert fighter. He studied law at Columbia University and met and fell in love with a woman named Electra Nachios. After earning his degree, Matt worked at a law firm, but decided to leave when he didn't like their practices and started his own firm alongside friend and colleague Foggy Nelson, and soon after Karen Page joined as their secretary. While this was going on, Matt had started moonlighting as a costumed vigilante in the crime-torn area of Hell's Kitchen and soon became known as Daredevil, or the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. Both versions did not start out in their iconic red costumes. In the comics, he started out in a yellow and red costume, while in the show, he started out in a full black outfit without the devil motif. Both versions carry a cane that can be converted into many different forms, including smaller clips for close combat and a grappling hook. Both versions are devout Catholics, but as Daredevil, they deal with crimes and villains that push their ideals to the brink. They're both master fighters and are incredibly agile. Both are blind, but their other senses are so incredibly sharp that he can see things no other human is capable of and perceives his surroundings in a very acute radar-like way. Both versions have similar rogues galleries, including the Kingpin, the Hand, and Bullseye, though I am still waiting for Stiltman to finally appear. And years later, they rekindled their relationships with the eternal old flame and assassin Elektra, though it doesn't end well for either. Their hairs are different colors, as he's a redhead in the comics, their builds are different, and the costume has never been the same cut or material used in the comics. And though this all predates his official MCU appearance, nothing he's done so far has really contradicted his character, except for why the hell he's suddenly wearing yellow and red in S.H.I.E.L.D. However, this is all ranked and written before Born Again comes out, so there's a fair chance that they change something so drastically that I have to kick him out of the top 20 altogether. If so, let's just pretend Cap wins and that Gambit was number 20 and call it a day. So there we have it, the top 20 most well-adapted MCU superheroes. To be honest, a lot of them, especially the top 5, were a lot closer than I expected them to be, though it is telling that 2 of the characters were originally not part of the MCU. What does this list tell you now that we've seen the top and bottom adaptations of both heroes and villains in the MCU? Does adapting them well matter and help them make money, or does it not matter at all? Now that I've done heroes and villains of the MCU, which should I rank the adaptations of next for best and worst of? Sony, Fox, or should I switch multiverses and go with the DCEU? Let me know which universe you'd like to see ranked top 20 best and worst adapted heroes of villains of next in the comments, and I'll just straight up do whichever one people ask for the most. Well, if you've made it this far, you are part of an elite group of super nerds who are interested in this very, very specific topic. Make it official by hitting that subscribe button and joining our ever-growing movement. And while you're there, you might as well hit that like button, even if you hated this video. Well, see ya!